And we're back for the 2022 season. Welcome to another episode of the Turn Up For What podcast, talking your Houston Texans straight from the Great British Isles. A couple of weeks off, thankfully not much happened. Our first break probably taken 18 months with this team, but it's finally the combine this week, and that's where the wheels of free agency start turning. And also you get a look at the prospects in a little bit more up close and personal in Indianapolis. But to talk us through this from the Texans Wire and bringing back the Texans Talk podcast, the good doctor himself, Mr. John Crumpler. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back on, Ewan. I'm excited for the off season to pick up here. And like you said, it really is the first time we've had a break from coverage. It's nice that everyone was just excited we hired Lovie, and that's been it for a few weeks. Like, just positive press.
So was Lovie the hire that gave realism, gave a sense of professionalism, probably some credibility as well, that the process probably didn't deserve?
I would agree with that. I mean, I have it written in my notes here. I'll just go ahead and jump into it. The process was probably a D plus process. I mean, the team announced 3 finalists on their own social page, and you ended up not hiring any of them. I was in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl, and the buzz everyone was talking about there is that the Texans were actively working to hire Jonathan Gannon. And I go home days later, Lovie Smith is hired. I don't think anyone saw it coming. But the good news is like you said, he's a very well-respected head coach. He brings a lot of credibility, and he kept Pep Hamilton. So I feel okay about it, for considering how poorly that could have turned out to lose all your finalists. I'm all right with it. How'd you feel about the process, the result?
Yeah, I think the process, is... The dysfunction doesn't discontinue, I think, and I know people are sick of talking about it. And partly because I think people don't want to think it's there, and I think that's fine. Everybody likes to just think of the good stuff and not the troubles that lie underneath the surface. But they're still there, and they're still very present, and they continue to hold us back. And there is a little bit of me wonders, will we ever truly move forward until all of that is gone? And you know what we're talking about. You know who we're talking about, and there's an obvious influence there. And people say, "Oh, he's not making decision personnel," and yeah, nobody's saying he is because he doesn't know fuck all about personnel. But what he does know about is how to influence people in positions that can make things from the outside perspective look very disjointed. And I think that's the reality of it, and that will continue to be the reality of this team. And probably Caserio will live and die by that. So it's just whether he can do enough on his end to compensate for all that kind of stuff. Now, does that affect you materially on a Sunday? It shouldn't, but it affects everything that leads up to a Sunday. But the process it is what it is, and I think they were, from my understanding, if you piece the Joshina Anderson tweets together, that basically they weren't kind of sold on the staff, I think, of Jonathan Gannon. I think I heard people exactly saying that, John, that he was around the Senior Bowl pretty much, thinking it was his gig to take, or people assumed that.
Yeah, everyone was just kind of talking about that he was expected to be the guy in Houston. That was the big favorite with anyone that I talked to that was there.
And then late, again, a common theme, late on it seems like it's going to be Josh McKeown, which is just ridiculous. It's asinine on so many levels. And then obviously the Flores angle was the other one. Would he have, been out? Was he just part of the tick box exercise, all the kind of, wrong behaviours that he's protesting, and rightly so again. So, yeah, look, when Lovie stood up there, it just felt like it was normal again for a while. And I think that's, normality, even just, being static rather than imploding, and I think we've had a long time of not feeling functional as an organisation, and it felt like he could at least steady the ship. We're not saying he's going to win that many games, and he might win you too many games this year. You never know. Probably likely outcome. But no, I felt like it just kind of gave a bit kind of feeling of normality, and a bit like there was an adult in the room for a change. He wasn't a patsy. He's respected around the league. players say I had somebody tweet the other day, he will attract players, and he's like, well, yeah, I mean the situation is probably overrides him for a while, but it is free agency, and I think the off season gives you a chance to kind of see a level playing field until the games come around. We're going to talk some free agency today. Quite a stark contrast watching the various teams, predominantly NFC games that I don't watch a lot of. But yeah, I mean, just tells you how absolutely what a shit show that offense has been for the last few years, because there was some much better football and much more organised up front in the trenches. So yeah, we'll get on to that. I tweeted out, just to wrap up the whole kind of point of the Bill Polian comments. Now,
I don't know. I don't know what their thinking is. I don't know what that's run by a guy named Easterby. And he's the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. Right. So we don't know what his thinking is. He never appears publicly, and so
he's like the Pope.
You don't know. Well, the Pope appears on the balcony.
That is true. The Pope does come out on the balcony from time to time.
See him. He actually has audiences and things like that.
True. Yeah. So not the Pope.
Yes, and I can tell you that Jim Harbaugh actually shook hands with him right up there on the podium at one of the masts. So he's out there.
But Bill Polian was very predictably hired Matt Eberflus, because that's where he's from. He spent time in Indianapolis, if you're not familiar with him, and Hall of Fame GM. Peyton Manning years, did it in Buffalo. He's been seen, bought the t-shirt. And he was involved, so he would have been speaking to agents. He would have had the very inner circles of how this league works. He would have seen that firsthand this off-season and helping Chicago hire, I'm forgetting the guy's name, the offensive lineman, and then also Matt Eberflus. And when they were talking about the Cully thing, he says right clearly there, he says that that they're run by a guy called Easterby, and he is the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. And then there's also a corroborating anecdote that follows that up to say that he was shaking hands with Jim Harbaugh at some sort of event. I wasn't quite clear, but ultimately, common practice that he is very influential, very calling the shots. So for everybody, John, I think he likes to say it's a media creation, or they just want to bury their head in the sand about it, or whatever. Yeah. They've just kind of fed up. Doesn't mean it's not true.
What I like to say is kind of my trademark has become fandom is a disease, and the Texans' illness might be a terminal one. I think it's easier to delude yourself into saying that Easterby doesn't matter than to admit that everyone else who's involved with the league says that he's a factor. And I think Bill Polian's comments played into that. And as nice as, like you said, I actually felt pretty comforted watching Caserio and Lovie up there at the introductory press conference. I was like, we have two grown-ups who are both capable of doing their jobs independently and at a high level with a proven track record of success. Like, I want to feel really good about this, but there's just all these gentle reminders that there is sort of this unsolved, uncertain presence in the building in Easterby that none of us, and I don't even think the front office knows how to evaluate what he's doing there.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And hopefully we'll see over time a bit more evolution of the front office. We've obviously seen the coaching staff, which will come on to that. But I just thought, you can say what you want, you can, think anything you want about this team, but ultimately, if you cannot discredit that source for me, and that was a very, very clear indication. Mm-hmm. I'm not seeing too many people pick it up. And if you say anything about it, there's always a raft of people that are willing to kind of jump on it. But ultimately, you don't get much people. You don't get people a bit any further closer to the inner sanctum of this league than somebody actively advocating for a hiring process of a team. And he would have seen it. He would have heard from agents, and it would have been discussed. So we don't want to talk about him, but I think it's negligent to not talk about him, because he's still a very much a reality of this team. If you want to delude yourself otherwise, then be my guest. There's a lot of delusions flying around just there, or sensitive topics. I think that's what I've learned in the last couple of weeks.
It's difficult because we have to keep talking about him because his name keeps coming up and he's so clearly a part of this process, but none of us actually know what he does. I don't even think Bill Polian's comments, like, it suggests everyone knows that. I think he called him, was it the Wizard of Oz comment that he made? And it kind of alludes to, we know that he plays a big part in the decision making, but we don't know in any capacity. So I think the team is doing itself a disservice at this point. It's fine if Jack is going to be a major part of the organization, but don't you kind of wish they'd let him come up in a press conference and say, like, this is what I do, this is what I am responsible for, this is what Nick is responsible for, I am involved in these discussions, I'm not involved. I think the team could kill a lot of negative PR if they just said, here's the boogeyman, there's nothing to be afraid of, like, this is what Jack act. But they're not going to do that. If they haven't done it yet, I don't think they're ever going to.
And that's it. And if it was so transparent and it was so, mundane and rudimentary of how you run a football team, then it would be out in the open. But there's a reason why they're hiding, and I think they'll continue to hide. And the cowardice of that screams, like, the actions of that, and is very, very clear and apparent for everybody. But hopefully we can find ways around it, and as we start building this team. And I think the biggest cloud hanging over this team, John's obviously been the Deshaun Watson situation. There seems like an end date of the 1st/3rd, 4th of April, where the criminal part of it, which was described to me as going to be as a misdemeanor at best, that may give teams some comfort. Do you think, and it's obviously kind of guesswork here, but do you think that gives us a chance to then clear that up and then move forward with a trade pre-draft? It gives you like 3 weeks to get the civil stuff settled.
I mean, tell me your understanding of the situation, but this is mine. So on April 1st, a decision will have to be made by a grand jury about whether they're going to proceed with criminal charges. Assuming that Watson is cleared, or like you said, it's a minor charge, that would open up the ability for him to be deposed about his civil charges. And the depositions would allow Busby to move forward with finding a settlement. So that would give us, 30? I think the draft is April 31st, April 29th, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, 28th, yeah. 28th.
The 28th.
Yeah.
I mean, 4 weeks. And really, I have to imagine it's the criminal stuff that teams are afraid of. If the criminal things go Houston's way, whatever that is, I hope there's justice. I hope the truth is found. But I think the best case for Houston is that the criminal stuff goes away, and that'll allow Watson to settle this individually. I do think they could find a trade partner. I mean, it is a desperate quarterback market, and for the first time in a while, there don't appear to be a lot of options. There's no elite guy coming out of the draft. It seems like every analyst has a different top quarterback. You have teams discussing Jimmy Garoppolo as a solution to how they can make the playoffs. And anyone who watched the Niners, personally, it feels like we just watched a fantastic offensive scheme and a stout defense drag Jimmy Garoppolo and his rah-rah personality to the playoffs. I don't think anyone wants to invest in that. So I have to think there's going to be a robust market. It's just like we saw last year when things started to wait, teams are going to make decisions before April on what their quarterback situation is. So if we get to April, who's going to have already committed to Jimmy Garoppolo for the season by then? Will Aaron Rodgers have been traded? What other veterans might have been moved around? Because the longer we wait, the more teams are going to pull themselves out of the race. But I'm cautiously optimistic on a deal being done before the draft. And then I'll ask you this question, but my expectations for a return are starting to go down. Are your expectations for what we're going to get back starting to decrease?
Yeah, I think it's like anything you put as something on the market, the longer it sits there, whatever factor you want to kind of leverage or use to your advantage, I suppose, to try and discount, what you ultimately end up paying. I suppose, yeah, it could be. Long as you get 3 firsts plus, substantial assets, then I think we'll all be okay. And there's a balance to be had, right? Because you don't want to move on and then regret it, because then, say in 3 years' time, somebody else, Athletes First or whatever, tries to engineer an exit for their client, and then that price gets trumped. That will not be great. And then you look back on yet another trade of giving away quality, starting caliber, if not, in transformational roster players for less than what they're worth. So yeah, there's a balance to be had there. I think if you get 3 firsts and 2 seconds, be okay. Do I think in real terms will it probably less than that? Yeah, probably. And that's just something we'll probably have to find our way. But as the process goes on, when people are starting to see their roster shape out, when owners are starting to pressure teams for work, David Tepper's the one that you think, if anybody's going to overpay, it'll be him, because you can't overpay we can only undersell, right? Because if he finds every little bit of form that he had before, 4 firsts, even 5 firsts, probably worth it, in the grand scale, just because how hard is it to be in the position at the top of the draft at the right year to then find the right prospect. It's not always at the top of the draft. It's often luck. There's so many variables in there. There's no exact formula for it. It's not like that the worst team in the league gets the best quarterback or best young quarterback every year. It just doesn't happen like that. So, yeah, I mean, you could have 3 or 4 goes at it, and or you have 2 goes if you trade up both picks. But yeah, we'll see.
I do think Carolina, they're the most desperate, and they have the most. I mean, if you add Brian Burns, the 6th pick, and even just 1 other first, forget 3, forget 2 more, I would be thrilled. I mean, can you imagine if let's say we draft Kyle Hamilton at 3 and we get Kayvon Thibodeau at 6, or Thibodeau, and then we got Brian Burns back in a trade? That's talking about a transformation where suddenly Lovie's defense is competitive. I would love a trade with Carolina or Washington. They feel equally desperate in terms of making the Commanders relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people have pushed Chase Young out there. I went and dug out the tape of Chase Young last year, and it ain't pretty. So, I think, obviously, all the talent in the world, would he be instantly better than everything we have on paper? Yes. Injured last year. And for me, I think if you take a big name back or a rising star, the issue is you then have to pay them perhaps 2 to 3 years earlier than the players you start taking this year. And if you think of our development curve and where that's headed, you probably want to hold off paying as many kind of cornerstone pieces as you can. So I would always be in the favour of picks, but also if you take picks, then it's a risk because obviously you've got to hit on them, and the hit rate, just regardless. Even if Nick Caserio is the best talent evaluator ever in the history of the game, that some people on Twitter will tell you is, after a 5-man draft last year, even if he is, there's going to be misses.
There's no guarantee. And also those picks we don't know where they're going to come in the future. That's one of the reasons I would take a guy like Burns or a guy like Young, even Jonathan Allen, just because okay, this is a player who's very good in the league, and it gets harder to hit on picks further in the draft. Like if those picks if Watson is who we say he is, and the player that we saw in Houston, those picks are probably coming in between 20 and 30, and that is the part of the draft when it starts to become a bit of a crapshoot, and it's harder to find those foundational positions that you really need, like edge rusher, like tackle. So I wouldn't mind paying someone. I don't know what your opinion. This would be a whole thing that we don't even have on the schedule, but I don't think that Houston's rebuild plan can be longer than 2 years. So if you're getting a guy in his 2-3 years, top 3 years is really pushing it. But any plan in the NFL, once you think you have a quarterback in place or once you started to strip it down, I think 2 to 3 years max. And I'm not afraid to pay a guy in their mid-20s because at some point, like when we watched the Cleveland Browns start to turn a corner when they overpaid Jarvis Landry because they had to signal to the league that they wanted to be competitive. At some point, you do have to bring in good football players.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we'll find out where the desire for free agents in the next couple of weeks. Just before we get to that, the coaching staff picked up some of Caserio's comments, in true style, said a lot, but didn't really say much of any substance. One thing he did say was, though, about Lovie, and he said very clearly his staff, and I'm assuming he's, because he's shown to hear, read, and listen to things more than I ever thought he would, because he often makes comments at the start of media conferences, or he'll reference it in the next interview about somebody said something about him. So he definitely hears it all. But he definitely, intentionally said Lovie's coaching staff. I always think, well, certainly for this year, after the James Camden experiment, I'm going to keep my powder dry enough. I think it's a good hire or not, trying to read the CV online and to see where it gets you. I think your 2 most important coaches and the 2 most impressive interviews, certainly, were George Warhol, laterally at Jacksonville, and Jacques Caesar, which was both very kind of imposing, very hard-nosed, traditional kind of football coaches, which I think we need. I don't think we've had enough of that. I think we've had a lot of yes men in the past. We've had a lot of kind of nice, kind of, might be technically sound. But yeah, I thought both those guys to me at least felt like leaders, and it at least felt like they would hold their players accountable in that position group room, and they were the two that stood out for me. Did you have any thoughts on the coaching stuff?
I like Warhop too. I think he has a good track record, or as good as we were going to get. It looks like the guys that they did bring in for the offensive line, they're going to be, it fits with Pep Hamilton's desire to have a run first offense. And I think that's something, I can't remember the last time I trusted the Houston Texans to run the ball. And I feel like that's the kind of staff they put together. Who was the other guy you were talking about?
Jacques Cesar, yeah, he's the defensive line coach.
Okay.
Both very complimentary of Lovie. Both, saying they were desperate to work for him again. And seemed like good guys. I think obviously, Ben McDaniel's has been promoted. A couple of names that you've kind of seen here and there before. So all in all, it seems to go. But I think you need to reserve judgment, because ultimately it's to do with the input of the ingredients and the quality of players they get. And then you've got to start with a base of something to get an output there. So, time will tell on that. I'm not going to make any proclamations of who I think is going to transform a positional unit, because they need players to do that. But Pep Hamilton is a darling of many people's eyes. I keep seeing this. I'm not quite sure why. And it's on my to-do list this off-season. Reached out to a couple of people in Indianapolis just to talk to them and go back through some of the tape with them from the Andrew Luck years, which I have started, but balancing that, draft prospects, free agency, it'll probably sort of May by the time I get into it properly.
You got a lot of tape to watch.
But there's a lot of tape to watch. But there's an overwhelming sense of, okay, there was good, but how much of that was Luck's talent, and how much of it, lacerated his spleen and got him, and made a transcendent generational talent retire early. And I think, you've got to, people seem to forget that, again, convenient truths and selective memories. But yeah, I want to really dig into that. What's your thoughts on Pep Hamilton? Because I'm not sure yet. I'm going to reserve judgment for when I do it, but I just think from everything I know anecdotally, I think people are a little bit ahead of themselves in terms of what he's going to bring and transform anything this year.
I mean, I've been extremely complimentary of Pep Hamilton. We'll see if I end up embarrassing myself with those comments. But for me, what sells it is his reputation around the league. I think 6 teams ended up interviewing him I think Chicago, the Giants brought him in, the Panthers, he denied an interview request to the Panthers, Jacksonville interviewed him, we interviewed him. And then you have guys like Benjamin Albright, who are as plugged in of anybody in the league. And he's the first name he says, like, guys to watch for head coaching candidacy next year. It looks like he has a fantastic reputation league-wide. What he did with Davis Mills this past season, it was rough at the beginning, as I think it would be expected to be for anyone working with this roster who was a 3rd-round draft pick in the rain in Buffalo. But if you look at those last 6 games, it's really as good as we possibly could have imagined with Mills. He engineered an offensive rookie of the year season with Herbert. And then I haven't looked at the film. It's not really my thing at this stage of my life. But
yeah, it's hours you don't get back. Trust me, it's a sick hobby I think I've amassed.
Exactly. You love it. You're good at it too. I need more practice, I think, to be really good at it and to feel confident talking about what I believe I'm seeing. But what I did look at is the numbers, and there were some really good offenses in Indianapolis. And what I don't understand is it looks like he was fired midway through a season where Andrew Luck played only 7 games. And I do think there is some responsibility on the offensive coordinator to make sure that your guys don't get hurt. But at the same time, talent really is going to dictate how many times your quarterback gets hit. I don't think the Bengals could have put together any better game plan to get the ball out of Joe Burrow's hands quickly in the Super Bowl. And we still saw at the end of the day, the game was decided by he got hit, and he got hit a lot. Andrew Luck never had a good offensive line. I would be very curious to hear what you find out from Indianapolis people. But for me, Pep Hamilton is the star at the top of the coaching staff that we brought in, because he is the biggest unknown and he has the most vertical mobility, I believe, compared to Lovie Smith. Very well-known commodity. I think we know exactly what we're going to see from his defense. He started to change it up a little bit at the end of last season, but largely we know Lovie loves his Tampa too. And we think we understand what we're going to see from him. Pep, it's been 7 years since he was an offensive coordinator. And since then, everything he's put on the field has looked good. It feels like we might have had a bit of a steal here to get this guy at offensive coordinator at this stage of his career compared to the trajectory he was on.
Yeah, I'm always kind of wary of how much people's interviews as agent kind of forces to get their name in the media. I'm not saying that teams weren't interested. I think they were, and they should be. But yeah, no, I'm interested to get into that over the summer and try and really understand my own understanding more than anything else about what it'll look like. But as you said, it's been a long time, so yeah, I mean, experience changes your view at certain things at times. You'll have principles that he wants to run by. I've seen you and many people get flack for kind of sort of any kind of grounding or objectivity around Davis Mills. I think for me, I said to somebody the other week there that I said, look, it's until I can watch him beat man coverage for 4 quarters, then I think it becomes a debate. But until then, I it's not a debate. It's an unfair debate to say either way, because one, there's the data collection is so limited. And what you have seen, there's too much variance in those data points of good, bad, and soft yards in garbage time. So the second half against Tennessee, if he can play like that, 2/3 of the time, then you've got a serviceable guy there. But again, you've got to think, Tennessee's secondary was not fit to take them into the depths of the playoffs. So, or defend the pass on a regular basis with any suitability for the quality of players that they're playing against. So I think we've got to take our powder dry. I feel a lot of people have got their emotions involved, and I think when you go through a lot of trauma, and when you go through a lot of trauma like this fan base has done, it's natural to again, like the inverse of the Easterby stuff. You want to try and believe that there's something there when there's not. Or you don't have any logical reason to or objective reasons to do so. So there will be times where there'll be rough tape again in year 2, but hopefully Pep and him can combine to be something that's different. And I think different will be good. At least for the first few weeks until the results will really materially kick in. Because I think everybody was so sick of that old scheme, and I think they're glad to see the back of it.
I mean, like I said earlier, fandom is a disease. And I think on the opposite of the Easterby, which is talking yourself, this might be talking yourself out of another negative idea that Davis Mills could be a very average quarterback. We saw glimpses of greatness from, and we also saw some really bad, like you said. No one knows what's going to happen with Davis. I told someone the other day, like right now, the Twitter discussion borders on anti-intellectual, the way it's going about people. It feels very emotional. He feels like the positive emotional crutch of the team. People either love him or they want to write him off. And the thing is, either way, we probably haven't seen enough